Most men fear the call at midnight. But for a soldier, the real terror isn't the noise of war. It is the silence of coming home to an empty house. I have seen bodies torn apart by IEDs in the desert. I have seen villages burned to ash. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I saw in that hospital room. My wife, Tessa, wasn't just hurt. She was dismantled. 31 fractures. A face I have kissed 1,000 times. Turned into a map of purple and black ruin. And the worst part? The people who did this were standing right outside her door, smiling at me. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. The flight back from deployment usually feels like the longest hours of my life. You sit there, vibrating with the engine, just imagining the moment you walk through the front door. I had been gone for 6 months on a rotation that did not officially exist. Delta Force work means you do not get to call home often. You do not get to tell your wife where you are. You just disappear, and you pray she is still there when you get back. I had replayed the reunion in my head 100 times. I would drop my gear in the hall. Tessa would hear the thud of the duffel bag. She would come running around the corner, sliding in her socks on the hardwood floor, and she would jump into my arms. That was the dream that kept me sane while I was hunting bad men in the dark. But when my taxi pulled up to our driveway at 2 a.m., the lights were off. That was the first thing that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Tessa never turned the porch light off when she knew I was coming. She used to say it was her lighthouse, guiding me back from the storm. Tonight, the house was a black void. I paid the driver and walked up the path. The silence was heavy. It pressed against my ears. I reached for my keys, but I didn't need them. The front door was unlocked. It was cracked open about an inch. My hand instantly went to my waistband, reaching for a sidearm that wasn't there. I wasn't in the sandbox anymore. I was in the suburbs of Virginia. I pushed the door open with my boot. Tessa. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet hallway. There was a smell. It wasn't dinner. It wasn't her perfume. It was the smell of bleach. Sharp, chemical, stinging the nose. And underneath the bleach, there was something else. Copper. Metallic. The smell of old pennies. I know that smell. Every operator knows that smell. It's blood. I moved through the house, clearing rooms out of instinct. Living room clear. Kitchen clear. But the dining room, the rug was gone. The hardwood floor was wet. Someone had scrubbed it, but in the moonlight coming through the window, I could see the dark stains that the bleach hadn't quite lifted. My phone buzzed in my pocket, shattering the silence. It was a number I didn't know. "Is this Hunter?" a voice asked. It was deep, professional, and tired. "Speaking. This is Detective Miller. You need to get to St. Jude's Medical Center. Immediately." The drive to the hospital is a blur in my memory. I don't remember the traffic lights. I don't remember parking. I only remember the cold air hitting my face as I sprinted toward the emergency room doors. I flashed my military ID at the nurse's station. "Tessa, my wife. Where is she?" The nurse looked at me with pity. That was the second warning. When the nurses look at you with pity, it means there is no good news. "She is in the ICU, sir. Room 404. But, you should know, the family is already there." The family. My stomach twisted. Tessa's family wasn't like mine. I grew up with nothing. Tessa grew up in a fortress. Her father, Victor, was a man who owned half the real estate in the county and owned the other half of the politicians. And then there were her brothers. 7 of them. Dominic, Evan, Felix, Grant, Ian, Kyle, and Mason. The Wolf Pack, Victor called them. They were loud, arrogant men who treated the world like it was something they could buy or break. They had never liked me. To them, I was just a grunt. A government dog who wasn't good enough for their sister. I turned the corner toward the ICU waiting area, and there they were. It looked like a blockade. Victor was sitting on a bench, looking at his watch like he was late for a board meeting. The 7 brothers were standing in a semicircle around the door to her room. When they saw me, the atmosphere changed. It wasn't grief I saw in their eyes. It was annoyance. Finally, Victor said, standing up. He smoothed his expensive suit. "The soldier returns." "Where is she?" I growled, stepping forward. Dominic, the oldest brother, stepped in my path. He was a big guy, a gym rat, but he had soft hands. He put a hand on my chest. Easy, Rambo. She's not in a state to see anyone right now. I looked at his hand on my chest. Then I looked at his eyes. Touch me again, Dominic, and you'll be in the bed next to her. He hesitated, then stepped back. I pushed past them and opened the door. The sound of the ventilator was the only thing in the room. Whoosh. Click. Whoosh. I walked to the side of the bed, and my knees almost gave out. If the name on the chart didn't say Tessa, I wouldn't have known it was her. Her face was swollen to twice its size. Her jaw was wired shut. One eye was completely sealed shut, purple and black. Her beautiful blonde hair had been shaved on the left side to make room for stitches that ran across her scalp like a railroad track. I reached out to touch her hand, but her hand was in a cast. I touched her shoulder instead. It was the only place that didn't look broken. Tessa, I whispered. I'm here. I'm home. She didn't move. The machine just kept breathing for her. The door opened behind me. It was the detective, Miller. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. Mr. Hunter, Miller said. I'm sorry. Who did this? I asked, not turning around. My eyes were fixed on Tessa's broken face. We believe it was a home invasion, Miller said. Robbery gone wrong. It happens. They probably panicked when she came downstairs. Beat her, took some jewelry, and ran. I turned around slowly. I looked at the detective. Then I looked past him, through the glass window of the room, at Victor and his 7 sons. They were talking to each other, laughing. Mason, the youngest, was showing something on his phone to Kyle. A robbery, I repeated. Yes, sir. We found signs of forced entry at the back door. I looked back at Tessa. I gently lifted her arm, the one that wasn't in a cast. I looked at her fingernails. They were clean. Detective, I said, my voice dangerously calm. My wife is a fighter. She takes kickboxing classes 3 times a week. If a stranger broke into our home and attacked her, she would have clawed his eyes out. There would be skin under her nails. There would be defensive wounds on her forearms. I pointed to her arms. Smooth. No bruises on the outside of the forearms. She didn't fight back, I said, which means she knew the person. She let them get close. Or she was held down. The detective's eyes flickered toward the window, toward Victor. It was a micro-expression, a tiny split second of fear. I caught it. We are investigating all leads, Miller said, sweating now. But the father, Mr. Victor, he has been very helpful. He hired a private security team to watch the house now. I bet he did, I said. I walked out of the room. The 7 brothers stopped talking as I approached. Victor looked at me with cold, dead eyes. Tragedy, Victor said flatly. But we will take care of her, Hunter. You have done your duty. You can go back to your base. We have the best doctors money can buy. I'm not going anywhere, I said. She's my daughter, Victor snapped, his voice rising. And you are just a husband who is never there. You weren't there to protect her. I'm handling this. I stepped close to him. I was 3 inches taller than him, and about 50 pounds of muscle heavier than his security guards. That's the problem, Victor, I whispered, so only he could hear. You're handling it too well. You don't look sad. You look inconvenienced. Victor's eye twitched. I looked at the brothers. 7 of them. Strong, capable men. Yet, not a single scratch on any of them. But I noticed something else. Mason, the youngest one. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the floor. His hands were shaking. He was holding a coffee cup, and the liquid was rippling. They were hiding something. A robbery, I said loud enough for all of them to hear. That's the story. Some junkie broke in and hit her. How many times? I looked at the medical chart I had swiped from the end of the bed. 31 times, I read aloud. 31 strikes with a blunt object. Probably a hammer. I looked at Grant. Then Ian. Then Dominic. A robber hits once to knock you down. Twice to keep you down. 31 times. I shook my head. 31 times is personal. 31 times is hate. Watch your mouth. Dominic stepped forward again. I'm going to find who did this, I said, looking directly at Victor. And when I do, I'm not going to call the police. I'm going to do what I was trained to do. I turned my back on them and walked toward the exit. I needed air. But more than that, I needed to get back to the house. The detective said it was a robbery. But my gut, the same gut instinct that kept me alive in the mountains of Afghanistan, told me the enemy wasn't some stranger in the dark. The enemy was standing in the waiting room. And they had made one fatal mistake. They didn't kill her. And they didn't kill me. I walked out into the cold night air, took out my phone, and canceled my return flight to base. The war was over there. But a new hunt had just begun here. The drive back to the house felt like a funeral procession of one. The streetlights flickered past my windshield like strobe lights, counting down the seconds until I had to face the reality of what happened in my own dining room. I parked my truck on the curb, killing the engine. The house sat there in the dark, silent and accusing. The police tape that had been strung across the front door was already sagging, fluttering in the cold wind. It felt lazy. It felt like they had already decided this crime wasn't worth the effort of a tight knot. I ducked under the yellow tape and pushed the front door open again. The house was freezing. The heating must have been turned off, or maybe the cold just lived here now. I didn't turn on the main lights. I didn't want the neighbors to see me. I flipped the switch on my tactical flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, dust that had been kicked up by a struggle. I walked straight to the dining room. In the hospital, I was a husband. Here, in the dark, I was an operator. I needed to switch off the part of my brain that loved Tessa and switch on the part that analyzed kill zones. If I didn't, the grief would drop me to my knees, and I couldn't afford to be on my knees. I needed to be on the hunt. I shined the light on the floor. The police report said robbery, but robbery is chaotic. Robbery is messy in a frantic way. Drawers pulled out, things smashed in a line toward the exit. This room was different. The chairs weren't knocked over randomly. They were pushed back against the walls, creating a circle, an arena. I knelt down near the spot where the bleach smell was strongest. The wood was warped from the chemicals, but the stain was deep. I traced the outer edge of the splatter with my gloved finger. Low velocity, I whispered to the empty room. If a stranger strikes you in a panic, they swing wide and wild. The blood flies in long, thin arcs, cast-off patterns on the walls. I shone my light on the walls. They were clean. That meant the blows were vertical, straight down, controlled. Someone hadn't been fighting her here. They had been punishing her. I moved to the center of the stain. There were 4 distinct scuff marks on the floor around the blood pool. Boot marks. Heavy treads. I placed my own boot next to one. It was a match for size, maybe a size 11 or 12. But there wasn't just one set. There were scuffs at the head, scuffs at the arms, scuffs at the legs. They had pinned her. 7 sons. I muttered, the bile rising in my throat. And 1 father. I could see it now. The geometry of the violence. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution that stopped just short of death. I stood up, my breathing getting heavy. I needed proof. The police, Detective Miller, clearly wasn't going to look for it. Victor had likely bought the department a new fleet of cruisers years ago. If I wanted justice, I had to find what the cops were paid to ignore. I looked around the room. Why here? Why the dining room? Tessa was smart. Smarter than me, smarter than her brothers. She knew who her family was. She had told me once, right before I deployed, "Hunter, my father is getting paranoid. He thinks I know too much about the shipping containers at the docks. If anything ever happens, check the table." At the time, I thought she was joking. We were drinking wine, laughing. I kissed her forehead and told her she watched too many spy movies. I cursed myself for not listening. I holstered the flashlight and crawled under the heavy oak dining table. It was an antique, something Victor had given us as a wedding gift, probably to remind us that even our furniture belonged to him. I ran my hands along the underside of the wood. Rough grain. Spiderwebs. Chewing gum I'd stuck there 2 years ago. Then, my fingers brushed against something smooth. Plastic. It was taped securely to the junction where the table leg met the frame. Duct tape. I peeled it back carefully. It was a digital voice recorder. Small, black, unobtrusive. The red light was off, meaning the battery had died, or it had run out of space. I pulled myself out from under the table, clutching the device like it was a holy relic. I sat on the floor, right next to the stain of my wife's blood, and pulled a spare pair of batteries from my pocket. I always carried spares. Old habits. I swapped the batteries. The screen flickered to life. Folder A1 file. Date, yesterday. Time, 7:42 p.m. My thumb hovered over the play button. I was terrified. I have breached compounds with terrorists waiting on the other side, and my heart rate never went above 60. Right now, it was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I didn't want to hear her pain, but I had to. I pressed play. Static. The sound of a door opening. Not kicked in, open with a key. Then, the voice. Smooth. Arrogant. Hello, sweetheart. Daddy's home. It was Victor. Then, the sound of boots. Many boots. The heavy thudding of a pack entering the room. Dad. Tessa's voice. She sounded surprised, but not shocked. She sounded resigned. I told you not to come here, Victor. You don't tell me where to go, Tessa, Victor said. We own this town. We own this street. And we own you. I'm not signing the papers, Dad, Tessa said. Her voice was shaking, but strong. I'm not letting you use Hunter's name for your shell companies. He's a soldier. He's honorable. I won't let you drag him into your filth. Honorable, a new voice scoffed. It was Dominic. I recognized the sneer. He's a grunt. A paid killer. We're just giving him a reason to retire. Grab her, Victor commanded. The recording dissolved into the sounds of a scuffle, a chair scraping, Tessa screaming, not a scream of fear, but of fury. Get off me. Get off. Then, a sickening thud. The first hit. I flinched in the dark dining room as if I had been hit myself. Hold her legs, Mason. Grant, get her arms. Don't let her move. I paused the tape. I couldn't listen to the rest. Not yet. I had heard enough to know the truth. The police report was a lie. The robbery was a fairy tale. This was a family meeting. I put the recorder in my pocket. I stood up. The sadness that had been weighing on my chest evaporated. In its place, something cold and hard settled in. It was a feeling I hadn't felt since my last tour in the mountains. It was the feeling of clarity. I walked out of the dining room and into the garage. Most suburban dads have a garage full of lawnmowers, rakes, and maybe a toolbox. I had those things, too. But behind the pegboard where I hung my wrenches, there was a false wall. I pushed the hidden latch. The pegboard swung open. Inside was a heavy steel safe. I spun the dial, left, right, left. Click. The door swung open. Inside wasn't a collection of hunting rifles. It was my past. It was the things the military let me keep and the things I had acquired on my own. I took out my plate carrier. No plates in it right now, but the pouches were ready. I took out a set of zip ties, the heavy-duty kind used for flexing cuffs. I took out a K-bar knife, the blade black and non-reflective. I didn't take a gun. Not yet. A gun is loud. A gun is quick. A gun is mercy. Victor and his 7 sons didn't deserve mercy. They deserved to feel every second of what was coming. I looked at my reflection in the small mirror mounted inside the safe door. My eyes looked different. The blue was gone, replaced by a dark, dilated pupil. The husband was asleep. The Delta operator was awake. I needed to know where they were. I needed to track the pack. And I knew exactly who the weak link was. Mason, the youngest. The one who was shaking in the hospital. The one who held the coffee cup like it was a grenade. He was the one who held her legs. He was the one who watched. And tonight, he was going to be the first one to speak. I closed the safe, grabbed a black hoodie, and walked out into the night. The silence of the house didn't bother me anymore. Because I knew, very soon, the silence would be broken by the sound of Mason screaming. The night air was biting, but I walked with the windows of my truck down. I needed the cold. I needed to keep my temperature low, my pulse steady. I drove to a secluded spot, An old overlook near the quarry that teenagers used for drinking and that I used for thinking. It was dark, silent, and dead. Perfect. I killed the engine and sat there for a moment, just breathing. The digital recorder was in my pocket, burning a hole through the fabric against my thigh. I had paused it right before the real horror began. I knew I had to listen to the rest. If I was going to do what I planned to do, I needed fuel. I needed to hate them more than I loved my own freedom. I pulled the recorder out. The small red light blinked once, a single mechanical heartbeat in the dark cab of the truck. I pressed play. The sounds that filled the truck were worse than any war zone. In war, there is chaos, shouting, explosions. This was intimate. This was the sound of heavy breathing, of fabric rustling, of leather gloves creaking as hands tightened their grip. Please, Tessa gasped. Her voice was strained, like someone was pressing a knee into her chest. Dad, please don't do this. I gave you a choice, Tessa. Victor's voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. It sounded like he was lecturing a child about spilled milk. I told you the business comes first. The family comes first. You chose him. You chose the outsider. He's my husband, she screamed, a sound that cracked in the middle. He's a liability, Victor said. And you are a disappointment. Hold her head still, Dominic. Then, the counting began. Thud. A wet, sickening crunch. It wasn't the sound of wood hitting bone. It was the sound of metal crushing cartilage. 1. Victor counted softly. Tessa didn't scream immediately. The first hit must have shocked her system into silence. Then, a low, guttural moan that didn't sound human. Thud. 2. She's moving too much. One of the brothers, Evan, maybe, grunted. Grab her hair. Pin it to the floor. I gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. My knuckles turned white. I could see it in my mind. My wife, my beautiful, strong Tessa, pinned to the floor of the house we built together, looking up at the faces of her brothers while her father beat her. Thud, thud, thud. 5, 6, 7. Victor wasn't rushing. He was taking his time. He was pacing himself. You wanted to go to the feds, Tessa? Victor panted slightly between swings. You wanted to tell them about the shipments? About the crates in warehouse 4? Well, here is your subpoena. Thud. 8. Tessa was crying now, begging. Mason, help me. Please. There was a pause on the tape. A hesitation. Don't you look away, Mason, Victor snapped. Look at her. This is what happens to rats. This is what happens to traitors. Hold her leg tight, or I will break yours next. I'm holding it, Dad, Mason's voice. Weak, trembling. But he didn't let go. He held her leg while his father shattered her. That was the moment I marked Mason for death. Cowardice is a sin, but participating in the torture of your own sister to save your own skin? That is a soul rot that cannot be cured. The counting continued. The sounds of the hammer hitting flesh became wet, squishy. The crunching of bone stopped because there was no bone left to break in that spot. 20. 21. I forced myself to listen to every single number. I etched each one into my brain. Every number was a promise. Every number was a debt I would collect. 30. 31. Victor let out a long breath. The metal hammer clattered to the floor. That's enough, Victor said. She's done. Is she dead? Kyle asked. Doesn't matter, Victor replied. If she lives, she's a vegetable. If she dies, we bury her. Either way, she can't talk. Clean the hammer. Get the bleach. Make it look like a break-in. Break the back door lock. What about Hunter? Dominic asked. He's coming back tonight. Let him come, Victor laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. He's a soldier. He follows orders. He respects authority. I'll talk to the chief of police. We'll spin a story. Hunter will be too busy crying to ask questions. And if he does, well, accidents happen to soldiers all the time. The recording ended. I sat in the silence for a long time. He follows orders. That's what they thought. They thought I was a dog on a leash. They thought the uniform made me obedient. They didn't understand what Delta Force really was. We don't just follow orders. We are the ones they send when the orders are illegal. We are the ones they send when the law isn't enough. I wasn't a soldier anymore. Tonight, I was an insurgency of one. I put the recorder away and started the truck. I didn't go back to the hospital. I didn't go back to the house. I drove to a 24-hour hardware store 3 towns over. I walked the aisles under the buzzing fluorescent lights. I looked like any other guy working a late shift, maybe a contractor fixing a leak. I bought a few things. A roll of heavy-duty plastic sheeting, a box of industrial-strength zip ties, a staple gun, and a hammer, a heavy, claw-style framing hammer. I weighed it in my hand. It felt balanced, solid. I paid with cash. The sleepy teenager at the register didn't even look up from his phone. "Have a good night," he mumbled. "It's going to be a long one," I said. I drove back toward the city. I knew where the wolf pack would be. On Friday nights, after a big win, and to them, silencing Tessa was a win, they always went to the same place. The Velvet Lounge, a high-end private club downtown that Victor owned. They would be there, drinking expensive scotch, patting each other on the back, celebrating their brutality. I wasn't going to storm the club. That would be suicide. 7 targets, plus security, plus Victor. No, you don't hunt a pack of wolves by running into the middle of the den. You wait on the perimeter. You wait for the straggler. I parked my truck 2 blocks away, in the shadows of an alley. I pulled my hood up and walked toward the club. I found a spot across the street, tucked into the doorway of a closed bakery. I watched the entrance. An hour passed, then 2. At 2:45 a.m., the door opened. Laughter spilled out onto the street. Dominic and Grant walked out first, loud and stumbling. Then came the others. They were high on adrenaline and liquor, but one was trailing behind. Mason. He wasn't laughing. He looked sick. He walked slightly apart from the group, checking his phone, looking over his shoulder. He waved off the offer of a ride in the limo. "I'm gonna walk a bit, clear my head," I heard him say. "I'll grab a cab later." "Suit yourself, baby brother," Dominic jeered. "Don't have nightmares." The limo pulled away with the 6 brothers. Mason stood alone on the sidewalk. He lit a cigarette, his hand shaking so badly he dropped the lighter twice. He started walking down 4th Street, heading toward the quieter part of town. Perfect. I moved out of the shadows. I didn't run. I walked with a silent, rolling gait that made no sound on the pavement. I closed the distance. 50 yards. 30 yards. 10. He stopped at a corner, waiting for the light to change. There were no cars. Just him and the ghosts he was trying to drink away. I stepped up right behind him. I could smell the expensive scotch sweating out of his pores. I leaned in close, my lips almost touching his ear. 31, I whispered. Mason froze. He went rigid as a statue. The cigarette fell from his fingers. He slowly turned his head. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, filled with a primal terror. He recognized me instantly. "Hunter," he stammered. I didn't. "Get in the alley," I said. I didn't show a weapon. I didn't have to. The look in my eyes was the weapon. "No, I can't." I grabbed his wrist. I didn't squeeze hard, just enough to let him feel the pressure point. I twisted. He gasped, dropping to one knee. "We need to talk about your sister," I said softly. "And you're going to tell me everything, or I'm going to start counting." Mason looked around for help, but the street was empty. He looked at me, and he saw his death. He nodded, tears instantly springing to his eyes. I pulled him into the darkness of the alley. The hunt had officially begun. The alley was narrow, smelling of wet cardboard and old grease. Mason was shaking so violently his teeth were actually chattering, a sound like dry bones clicking together in the dark. I pushed him against the brick wall. I didn't slam him. I just applied pressure until he had nowhere to go but backward. "Please," Mason whimpered, his hands up in a surrender that meant nothing. "Hunter, you don't understand. I had to. He made me." "Who made you?" I asked, my voice flat. "Your father?" "Yes. Victor. You know how he is. If I didn't hold her legs, he would have done the same to me." I looked at him, really looked at him. He was 22 years old. He wore a watch that cost more than my truck. He had never worked a day in his life, never fought for anything, never bled for anything. And he thought fear was an excuse for monstrosity. You held her legs, I repeated. You felt her fighting. You heard her begging you. Mason, help me. That's what she said, right? Mason flinched. I tried to look away. That doesn't matter, I said. You were there. You were part of the equation. I pulled a zip tie from my pocket. The sound of the plastic ratcheting shut around his wrists was loud in the quiet alley. I didn't bind his hands behind his back. I bound them in front of him. It made him feel like he still had some control, which would make him talk faster. Where is the warehouse? I asked. What warehouse? He played dumb. A reflex. I took the hammer out of my belt loop. I didn't raise it. I just let the heavy steel head rest in my palm. Mason's eyes locked onto it. He knew exactly what this hammer meant. He had seen one just like it earlier that night. Warehouse 4, he blurted out. At the docks. The South Terminal. That's where the shipment is. What's in the shipment? Guns. Mostly modified ARs and some military surplus we acquired. They're shipping out to a buyer in Sudan on Tuesday. And the others? Where are they right now? They went to Dominic's penthouse. They're continuing the party. I nodded. Information acquired. But I wasn't done with Mason. He was my message in a bottle. You're going to do something for me, Mason. You're going to disappear. What? If you go back to them now, they'll know I got to you. They'll know I know. And they'll circle the wagons. I need them paranoid. I need them wondering. I dragged him to my truck. I didn't throw him in the trunk. That's amateur hour. I put him in the passenger seat and engaged the child lock. I buckled him in. We're going for a ride, I said. I drove him 20 miles out of town to an old abandoned grain silo I had scouted years ago for training exercises. It was isolated, soundproof, and terrifying at night. I walked him inside. The space was vast and echoed with every step. I zip-tied him to a support beam. I gave him a bottle of water. I didn't beat him. I didn't touch him. You stay here, I said. You think about what you did. You think about the number 31. You're leaving me here? He cried. I'll freeze. It's 50 degrees, I said. You'll be uncomfortable. But you'll live. Tessa might not. So you sit here and pray she wakes up? Because if she dies, I come back. And I won't bring water next time. I left him screaming into the darkness and drove back to the city. Now, the real work began. I parked a block away from Dominic's penthouse building. It was a fortress of glass and steel, the kind of place bought with blood money. I couldn't get in, not yet. But I could see in. I set up in a parking garage across the street, on the top level. I pulled out my spotting scope. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, I could see them. The wolf pack. Dominic was pacing, a drink in his hand. He looked angry. He was probably calling Mason's phone. Evan and Felix were sitting on the couch, laughing at something on the TV. Grant was doing lines of something right off the coffee table. Ian and Kyle were arm wrestling on the kitchen island. They looked so comfortable, so safe. I took out my phone. I had cloned Mason's SIM card before I left him at the silo, a little trick a contact in Intel taught me. I sent a text from Mason to the group chat. Message, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to the cops. Don't look for me. I watched through the scope. The reaction was instant. Dominic checked his phone. He froze. He showed the phone to Evan. The laughter stopped. Grant wiped the powder off the table in a panic. The arm wrestling ended. They started arguing. I could see Dominic shouting, pointing at the door. He was sending people out to look for Mason. Chaos. Panic is the enemy of organization. When people panic, they make mistakes. They get sloppy. I packed up my scope. I knew their next move. If they thought Mason was going to the cops, they would try to scrub the evidence. They would go to Warehouse 4 to move the guns before the police arrived. They were doing my work for me. They were gathering all the evidence in one place. I drove to the docks. The South Terminal was a maze of shipping containers, rust, and shadows. It was the kind of place where bad things happened and nobody saw. I parked my truck a mile away and moved in on foot. I was wearing my full kit now, black tactical pants, boots, gloves, and a balaclava. I didn't have a rifle, but I had my knife, my hammer, and the darkness. I found Warehouse 4. There were 2 black SUVs parked outside. Victor's men. I climbed up the side of the adjacent building, moving silently across the corrugated metal roof until I was looking down through a skylight into the warehouse. Below me, I saw Victor. He was there personally, shouting orders. "Move it all. Now," Victor yelled. "If that idiot boy talks to the police, they'll be here by morning. Burn the paperwork. Load the crates into the truck." Dominic and Evan were there, sweating, hauling heavy wooden crates. I knew Mason was weak, Dominic spat. "We should have handled him." "Shut up and lift," Victor snapped. I watched them for 10 minutes. I took photos with a small digital camera I kept in my gear bag. Faces, crates, serial numbers on the weapons visible in the open boxes. This was federal prison time. This was life sentences for all of them. But prison was too safe. Prison meant they got 3 meals a day and a bed. Tessa didn't get that. I needed to thin the herd. I moved to the back of the warehouse, where the power junction box was located. It was an old industrial box, rusted shut. I pried it open with my knife. I found the main breaker for the warehouse lights. I didn't cut it yet. I waited. A guard, one of Victor's private security goons, not a brother, walked out the back door to have a smoke. He was standing right below me. I dropped. I landed behind him, silent as a cat. Before he could turn, I had him in a sleeper hold. 6 seconds later, he was unconscious. I dragged him into the shadows and zip-tied him. I took his radio. I put the earpiece in. "Perimeter check," a voice crackled. "Status." I clicked the mic twice. Click, click. The universal signal for "all clear" when you can't talk. "Copy," the voice said. I climbed back up to the roof. I looked down at the brothers. They were working hard, tired, stressed. It was time to introduce a little fear. I pulled the main breaker. Clunk. The warehouse plunged into total darkness. "What the hell?" Victor's voice echoed. "Who cut the power?" "Check the fuse box," Dominic yelled. Flashlight beams started cutting through the dark, frantic and shaky. I slipped through the open skylight, dropping onto the top of a stack of shipping containers inside the warehouse. I was 20 feet above them, invisible in the gloom. I picked up a large bolt, a heavy piece of industrial steel I found on the roof, and threw it against the far wall. Clang. The flashlight beams all swung toward the noise. "Who's there?" Evan shouted. He pulled a gun, a flashy chrome pistol. He held it sideways, like a gangster in a movie. I moved along the tops of the containers, silent. I dropped another bolt on the opposite side. Clang. They spun around again. "It's Mason," Victor hissed. "He's trying to scare us." "Mason? Get out here, boy." I wasn't Mason. I located my first target. Kyle. He had drifted away from the group to check the back office. He was alone. I dropped down behind him. He heard my boots hit the concrete and spun around, shining his light in my face. For a second, all he saw was a figure in black. "Mason?" he asked. I stepped forward and knocked the flashlight out of his hand. It spun across the floor, the beam creating a dizzying strobe effect. "Not Mason," I whispered. "I didn't kill him." I swept his legs, dropping him hard to the concrete. As he tried to scramble away, I grabbed his right hand, the hand he used to hold Tessa down. I placed it on the concrete floor. I raised my boot. Crunch. Kyle screamed. A high, piercing sound that cut through the dark warehouse. I vanished back into the shadows before the others could reach him. "Kyle!" Dominic yelled. "Kyle, where are you?" They found him cradling his shattered hand, sobbing on the floor. "He's here," Kyle gasped. "It's Hunter. He's here." "Hunter?" Victor sounded unsure. "He's a soldier, not a ghost. He's in the dark." Kyle screamed. He crushed my hand. The brothers huddled together, their flashlights pointing outward in a circle. They were terrified. They were the prey now. I watched them from the top of the containers. 1 down, 6 to go. And the night was still young. Panic is a virus. It spreads faster than any infection. I watched from the high ground, atop a stack of shipping crates, as the wolf pack crumbled below me. They were no longer a family. They were a terrified herd of animals, flashing their lights into the darkness, jumping at shadows. Victor was trying to maintain control, but his voice was tight. Stop screaming. Everyone form a perimeter. Watch the doors. He broke my hand. Kyle was still sobbing on the floor, clutching his mangled fingers. He just appeared out of nowhere. He's a demon. He's one man. Victor roared, slapping Kyle across the face to shut him up. One man with a grudge. Grant, Ian, check the loading dock. Dominic, Evan, get the guns loaded. We kill him if he steps into the light. I smiled under my mask. If I stepped into the light. I didn't plan on stepping anywhere they could see me. I watched Grant and Ian move toward the loading dock doors. They were shoulder to shoulder, their pistols raised. Their technique was sloppy. They were looking straight ahead, tunnel-visioned. They forgot to look up. I moved silently along the metal rafters. The warehouse was old, and the beams were thick with dust, but sturdy. I was directly above them. Ian was shaking. I don't like this, Grant. Did you see Kyle's hand? It looked like hamburger meat. Shut up, Grant hissed. Just find the breaker and turn the lights back on. They reached the door. Grant reached for the handle. I dropped a heavy coil of rope I had found on the catwalk. It hit the ground 10 feet behind them with a loud thump. Both of them spun around, firing blindly into the dark. Bang, bang, bang. Muzzle flashes lit up the warehouse like lightning strikes. They were shooting at nothing. Hold your fire. Victor screamed from the center of the room. You'll hit the crates. I used the noise of their gunfire to drop down behind a forklift. I was now on the ground level, behind their line of sight. Grant and Ian were reloading, their hands trembling. I hit him, Grant said, trying to convince himself. I think I saw him fall. You shot a pile of pallets, I said. My voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere in the echoey warehouse. They froze. Who said that? Ian whispered. I picked up a large wrench from the forklift seat. I threw it hard, skidding it across the floor to their left. As they turned toward the noise, I moved right. I was on Ian before he could turn back. I didn't use a knife. I used my elbow, driving it into the solar plexus. The wind left him with a wet wheeze. He folded in half. I grabbed him by the back of his tactical vest and hurled him into a stack of empty oil drums. The crash was deafening. Grant spun around, eyes wild. Ian, he saw me then. Just a silhouette in the gloom. He raised his gun. I was faster. I closed the distance in 2 strides. I grabbed the slide of his pistol, pushing it out of battery so it couldn't fire. With my other hand, I struck him in the throat, a precise, controlled chop to the vagus nerve. Grant gagged, his eyes rolling back. He dropped the gun, clutching his neck. I swept his legs, and he hit the concrete hard. I leaned over him. That's 2, I whispered. 4 to go. I didn't break their bones this time. I wanted them mobile enough to run back to Daddy. Fear works better when the victims can tell the story. I melted back into the shadows just as Victor and the others came running toward the noise. Grant, Ian, Dominic shouted. They found them. Ian was groaning in the oil drums, and Grant was gasping for air on the floor. He's here, Grant rasped. He's too fast. Victor looked around, his face pale in the beam of his flashlight. Everybody out. Get to the cars. Forget the crates. We leave now. They scrambled. It was pathetic. The wolf pack ran like frightened children. They dragged Kyle and supported Grant, stumbling toward the exit. I let them go. I could have stopped them. I could have slashed their tires. But I wanted them to leave. I wanted them to feel safe for a moment, only to realize the nightmare followed them home. As their SUVs peeled out of the lot, tires screeching, I walked over to the open crates they left behind. Illegal assault rifles, grenades, crate after crate of military-grade hardware destined for a warlord in Sudan. I took out my phone and dialed Detective Miller. Miller, he answered, sounding asleep. Warehouse 4, South Terminal, I said. You might want to bring the bomb squad. And Miller, Hunter, is that you? If you sweep this under the rug like you did my wife's attack, I said, your name will be on the list next to theirs. I hung up. I waited in the shadows until I heard the sirens. The real police were coming this time, or at least enough of them that Miller couldn't hide this. I watched from the roof as swarms of cruisers arrived. They found the guns. They found the blood from Kyle's hand. They found the chaos. This was the first nail in Victor's coffin. His illegal business was exposed. But the night wasn't over. I returned to my truck and checked the tracker I had placed on Victor's SUV earlier that night while they were in the warehouse. The little red dot on my tablet was moving fast. They weren't going to the penthouse. They were heading out of the city. They were going to the fortress, Victor's heavy security estate in the hills. High walls, cameras, armed guards. They thought they would be safe there. They were wrong. I drove toward the estate, keeping my distance. As I drove, I thought about the mid-story twist that was coming. I needed to know why. Why did they hate me so much? Why did they hate her so much? Victor was a monster, yes, but monsters usually have a reason. Money wasn't enough of a reason for 31 hammer strikes. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Message, I know what you're doing, and I can help, but you need to know the truth about Tessa. I stared at the screen. Who is this? I pulled over to the side of the road. Me, who is this? Reply. Someone who hates Victor as much as you do. Meet me at the old diner on Route 9. Alone. It was a trap. It had to be. But my instincts told me something else. The text didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a lifeline. I turned the truck around. The fortress could wait. The hunt could pause for an hour. If there was a truth I was missing, I needed it. I arrived at the diner. It was a 24-hour greasy spoon with flickering neon lights. There was only one car in the lot. A modest sedan. I walked in. A woman was sitting in the back booth. She was wearing a trench coat and sunglasses, even though it was 4 a.m. I sat across from her. I kept my hand near my knife. She took off her glasses. She was older, maybe 50. Her face was lined with stress, but her eyes were sharp. You don't know me, she said. My name is Eleanor. I was Victor's personal assistant for 20 years. Until he fired me last week because I refused to shred the files on Tessa. Why did they do it, Eleanor? I asked. Why did they try to kill her? Eleanor reached into her bag. I tensed. She pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the table. It wasn't just about the guns, Hunter, she whispered. Tessa found out about the guns, yes. But that wasn't why Victor snapped. It was what she told him that night. What did she tell him? Open it. I opened the envelope. Inside was a medical report. It was dated 2 weeks ago. Patient, Tessa Hunter. Status, pregnant. 8 weeks. My heart stopped. The world tilted on its axis. Pregnant? She didn't tell you yet, Eleanor said softly. She wanted to surprise you when you came home. She went to Victor that night to tell him she was leaving the family for good. She told him, my child will not grow up around a monster like you. My child will be a hunter, not a wolf. I stared at the paper. My hands were shaking. A baby. We were having a baby. Victor couldn't handle that. Eleanor continued. He couldn't handle the idea of his bloodline being mixed with yours. He calls you a mongrel. He wanted to wipe the slate clean. He wanted to kill the baby. I looked up at her. The rage I felt before was a candle flame. What I felt now was a nuclear explosion. Did the baby survive? I asked, my voice cracking. Eleanor looked down. The report from the ER said, trauma to the abdomen. I don't know, Hunter. I'm sorry. I stood up. The booth seat creaked. Thank you, Eleanor, I said. Go home. Lock your doors. Where are you going? She asked. I'm going to finish this, I said. I'm going to kill them all. I walked out of the diner. The sky was starting to turn gray in the east. Dawn was coming. But for Victor and his sons, the sun was about to set forever. I got back in my truck. I didn't feel the cold anymore. I didn't feel fatigue. They killed my child. They beat my wife. The rules of engagement were gone. There was no more non-lethal. There was no more sending a message. This was extermination. I drove toward the estate. The wolf pack was huddled inside their fortress, thinking they were safe behind walls and guards. They didn't know that a Delta father was coming for them. And a Delta father doesn't stop until the threat is eliminated. The sun was bleeding into the sky, a bruised purple dawn that matched the feeling in my chest. I drove toward Victor's estate. The fortress, with the medical report burning a hole in the passenger seat. Pregnant. The word echoed in my mind with the rhythm of the tires on the asphalt. Pregnant. Pregnant. Every mile I drove, the image of Tessa changed. I didn't just see my wife anymore. I saw a mother. I saw her protecting her belly while 7 men held her down. I saw her screaming not for herself, but for the life inside her. I pulled off the main road about 2 miles from the estate entrance. I knew the layout of the fortress. Victor had bragged about it once at a Christmas party. 12-foot walls, motion sensors, armed patrols. But every fortress has a flaw. And Victor's flaw was arrogance. He thought technology could replace vigilance. I parked the truck in a dense patch of woods and continued on foot. I moved through the forest like a ghost. I was back in the mountains of Tora Bora. The trees were different, the air was thicker, but the mission was the same: infiltrate, destroy, exfiltrate. I reached the perimeter wall. It was stone, topped with electrified wire. I took out a pair of rubber-insulated wire cutters. I didn't cut the wire. That would trigger an alarm. Instead, I found a tree that grew close to the wall, a massive oak whose branches hung over the boundary. Victor had likely kept it for aesthetics. Bad move. I climbed the tree. I crawled out onto the limb that extended over the wall. I dropped down onto the manicured lawn inside. I was in. I moved from shadow to shadow, avoiding the sweeping arcs of the security cameras. I made my way to the main house. It was a sprawling mansion with huge windows. I peered through the living room window. They were there, the remaining wolf pack. Victor was pacing in front of the fireplace. Dominic, Evan, Felix, and the injured ones: Kyle, hand bandaged; Grant, throat bruised; and Ian, ribs taped. They looked exhausted. They were arguing. I couldn't hear them through the double-paned glass, but I could read their body language. Victor was shouting. Dominic was pointing at the door. They were unraveling. Then, something happened that stopped me cold. A man in a white lab coat walked into the room. A doctor. I recognized him. Dr. Sterling. He was the chief of surgery at St. Jude's, the same hospital where Tessa was lying in a coma. Why was he here? I pressed my ear against the glass, straining to hear. Complications, Sterling was saying. But she is stable for now. And the extraction? Victor asked. Successful, Sterling nodded. The C-section was performed immediately upon arrival. The trauma induced labor, but the fetus was viable. 32 weeks, not 8. The report Eleanor saw was old. She was much further along than she told anyone. My knees hit the grass. 32 weeks. That's 8 months. She had been hiding it. She had been wearing loose clothes, staying home. She was protecting him. And the child? Victor asked. His voice was devoid of any grandfatherly warmth. He is in the neonatal incubator in the basement, Sterling said. Healthy. Strong lungs. Good, Victor said. My buyer arrives tomorrow. A healthy male heir fetches a high price in the black market adoption circles, especially with clean genetics. The world went silent. They hadn't killed my son. They had stolen him. They beat my wife into a coma to induce labor, so they could steal our child and sell him like a piece of furniture. It wasn't just hate. It was profit. It was the ultimate betrayal of blood. The rage that filled me then was so pure, so white-hot, that my vision actually blurred. I had to close my eyes and breathe for 10 seconds just to keep from screaming. My son is alive. He is in the basement. The mission parameters shifted instantly. Priority 1, secure the asset, my son. Priority 2, eliminate hostiles. I couldn't just start killing. If a stray bullet went through the floor, if a fire started, I could hurt the boy. I needed to be surgical. I moved around the house to the basement access. There were storm doors, locked from the inside. I used a small pry bar to gently wedge the lock. It snapped with a dull pop. I slipped inside. The basement wasn't a dark dungeon. It was a fully equipped medical facility. Victor had built a private clinic down here for off-the-books treatments for his criminal friends. And there, in the center of the room, was an incubator. The soft hum of the machine was the only sound. Inside, under the warm light, was a tiny, wriggling baby boy. He had a full head of dark hair. My hair. I walked over to him, my boots heavy on the linoleum. I placed my gloved hand on the plastic glass. He was so small, so perfect, and he was alone in a room full of monsters. "I'm here, buddy," I whispered. "Dad's here." I needed to get him out. But the incubator was heavy, plugged into the wall. I couldn't just carry it out through the woods. He needed the warmth, the oxygen mix. I heard footsteps on the stairs above. "Check the levels." Victor's voice drifted down. "I want him in prime condition for the handoff." The door at the top of the stairs opened. I had seconds. I couldn't hide. I couldn't run with the baby yet. I looked around. There was a breaker panel on the wall. I flipped the main switch for the upstairs power, but left the emergency generator circuit, which powered the medical equipment, alone. Upstairs, the lights died. "What now?" Victor screamed. "Dominic, check the generator." Heavy footsteps came thundering down the stairs. "Dominic." I hid behind a stack of oxygen tanks. Dominic burst into the room, his flashlight sweeping the space. "It's fine down here," he yelled up. "The medical circuit is separate. It must be the main grid." He walked over to the incubator. He looked at my son. "Little bastard," Dominic sneered. He tapped on the glass, hard. The baby flinched. That was it. I stepped out from behind the tanks. "Don't touch him," I said. Dominic spun around, dropping his flashlight. He reached for his gun, but he was too slow. I didn't use a weapon. I grabbed him by the throat with one hand and slammed him against the wall. The impact shook the room. "You," Dominic choked, his eyes bulging. "How?" "Shoo," I whispered, pressing my finger to my lips. "You'll wake the baby." I squeezed. Dominic clawed at my arm, his legs kicking. But he was fighting a man who had trained to kill with his bare hands since he was 18. I crushed his windpipe. Not enough to kill him instantly, but enough to ensure he wouldn't be breathing without a tube for the rest of his miserable life. He slumped to the floor, gasping for air that wouldn't come. I took his gun. I took his radio. I looked at the baby. He was sleeping, unaware that his uncle was dying 3 feet away. "One down," I whispered to my son. 5 to go. I dragged Dominic's body into a supply closet. I took his phone. I sent a text to the group chat. Message from Dominic, generator is acting up. Need a hand. Send Evan. I waited. 2 minutes later, the door opened again. "Dominic." Evan called out. "What's wrong with the damn thing?" Evan walked down the stairs. He saw the incubator. He saw the empty room. He didn't see me standing in the shadow of the doorframe. As he passed me, I struck. A solid blow to the back of the knee to drop him, followed by a sleeper hold. Evan struggled for 4 seconds. Then he went limp. I dragged him into the closet with Dominic. It was getting crowded in there. I had neutralized the 2 biggest threats. But Victor was still upstairs with Felix, Grant, Ian, Kyle, and the doctor. I couldn't lure them all down here one by one. They would get suspicious. I needed to change the game. I looked at the oxygen tanks. Highly flammable. Explosive if ruptured. I grabbed a wrench. I loosened the valve on one of the spare tanks just enough to let a steady hiss of gas escape. The room started to fill with pure oxygen. I found a rolling medical cart. I carefully unplugged the incubator's battery backup. It had 2 hours of charge, and loaded the unit onto the cart. I was taking my son, and I was leaving them a surprise. I pushed the cart toward the storm doors I had entered through. The fresh air hit my face. I rolled the cart out into the night, hiding it behind a thick row of hedges about 50 yards from the house. I covered it with my camouflage tarp, leaving enough airflow. "Stay quiet, soldier," I whispered to the baby. I went back to the basement door. I took a road flare from my kit. I stood at the bottom of the stairs and yelled. "Vector!" The name echoed up the stairwell. I heard the commotion upstairs. Footsteps running. "Hunter!" Victor screamed. "He's in the basement. Kill him." They were coming. All of them. I lit the flare. It sparked to life, a brilliant red magnesium fire. I tossed it into the room, filled with leaking oxygen. I slammed the storm door shut and ran. Boom. The explosion was contained, but massive. It blew the basement windows out. It shook the foundation of the house. Smoke poured out of the vents. The fire alarm started wailing. I ran back to the hedges. The baby was crying now, startled by the noise. I rocked the cart gently. "It's okay," I said. "That was just the fireworks." I looked back at the house. The basement was an inferno, but the fire was spreading up. They would be forced out. They would have to run out the front door, right onto the lawn where I was waiting. The trap was sprung. I wasn't the hunted anymore. I was the one holding the match. The front door burst open. Victor and the remaining sons stumbled out, coughing, eyes watering from the smoke. They were disorganized, panicked, and blinded by the smoke. And I was sitting in the tree line, watching them through the scope of Dominic's rifle. "Run," I whispered. The lawn of the fortress was bathed in the flickering orange glow of the house fire. It was beautiful in a terrifying way, like watching Rome burn, but on a suburban scale. The fire alarm was still shrieking, a relentless, mechanical scream that masked the sound of my breathing as I lay prone in the tree line. Victor and his sons, Felix, Grant, Ian, Kyle, stumbled onto the grass, coughing and wiping soot from their eyes. The doctor, Sterling, ran out last, clutching his briefcase like it held his soul. "Where are Dominic and Evan?" Victor screamed, looking back at the smoking doorway. "They were in the basement." Felix yelled. "The explosion came from down there." "Get the water," Victor ordered, pointing at a garden hose. "Put it out. The boy is down there." They didn't care about Dominic or Evan. They cared about the product. They thought the baby was still in the incubator, burning. I watched through the scope of Dominic's rifle. The crosshairs drifted over Victor's chest. I could end it right now. One squeeze. Center mass. But death was too easy. A bullet is a period at the end of a sentence. I wanted to write a whole paragraph of suffering for them. I wanted to dismantle everything they had before I took their lives. I lowered the rifle. The fire trucks were coming. I could hear the sirens in the distance. The police would be with them. And this time, with the warehouse raided and illegal guns found, the police wouldn't be friendly. I looked at the baby in the incubator cart next to me. He was safe, sleeping under the tarp. I picked up Dominic's phone, which I had taken earlier. I unlocked it with his thumbprint, another benefit of having the body nearby earlier. I went into his banking app. I went into his email. While they were fighting a losing battle against the fire, I was fighting a war on a different front. I accessed the family's offshore accounts. Dominic was the money man. He had all the passwords saved in a secure folder called the Vault. Arrogance is a terrible security system. I initiated a transfer. Not to me. I wasn't a thief. I transferred every single cent. Millions of dollars from the arms deals, the real estate scams, the bribes, to a charity for victims of domestic violence. Enter. Transfer complete. In 3 seconds, the Wolf Pack went from being the richest family in Virginia to being broke. Then, I opened his email. I found the folder labeled Insurance. It contained PDFs of bribes paid to judges, police chiefs, and politicians. I forwarded it to the FBI field office in Richmond. I forwarded it to the Washington Post. I forwarded it to Detective Miller, just to let him know his career was over. "Checkmate," I whispered. The sirens were getting louder. Victor must have heard them too. He stopped yelling at his sons. He looked at the gate. "We have to go," Victor said. "The feds will be here. If they find the lab." "The lab is burning, Dad," Felix shouted. "The evidence is gone." "Not all of it," I said to myself. I picked up the incubator cart. I needed to move. I couldn't be here when the cops arrived. I had the baby, I had the evidence, and I had their money. But I wasn't done with the men. I retreated into the deep woods, pushing the cart along an old logging trail I had scouted on the map. I moved 2 miles away to a safe house, an old hunting cabin that belonged to a buddy of mine who was deployed overseas. It was off the grid. Solar power. Well, water. No internet. I got the baby settled. I warmed up a bottle of formula I found in the medical supplies on the cart. Feeding my son for the first time, it changed me. Watching his tiny hands grip the bottle, seeing his eyes open and look at me, Blue, just like mine. It washed away the blood on my hands. I'm going to call you Leo, I whispered. Because you're a little lion. You survived the den. Leo fell asleep. I checked the news on my phone. Breaking news. Fire at prominent businessman's estate reveals illegal medical lab. Police discover 2 bodies in basement. Massive arms trafficking ring exposed. They found Dominic and Evan. The news reported them as bodies, but the coroner would find they were alive, barely. They were in critical condition from smoke inhalation and blunt force trauma to the throat. Victor, Felix, Grant, Ian, and Kyle were in the wind. They had fled before the police arrived. Good. If they were in custody, they would get lawyers. They would get plea deals. They would get 3 meals a day. If they were running, they were in my world. I knew where they would go. When a wolf is wounded, it doesn't go to the city. It goes to the wild. Victor had a doomsday cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains. He talked about it all the time. If the world ends, we go to the ridge. It was a fortified bunker disguised as a log cabin. Solar panels, satellite comms, food for years. It was where they would go to regroup, to hide, to plan their counterattack. They thought it was a sanctuary. I knew it was a trap. I packed my gear. I kissed Leo on the forehead. I have to go finish this, Leo, I said. I have to make sure they never come back for you. I called Eleanor, the assistant who helped me. Eleanor, I said when she answered. I need a babysitter. A permanent one. Hunter, where are you? I'm bringing you a package. You take him. You drive him 3 states away. You don't tell anyone. Not even me. Is it? Yes. He's alive. I met Eleanor at a rest stop an hour later. She cried when she saw Leo. She took him in her arms like he was her own. Go, I said. I'll find you when it's over. Be careful, Hunter, she said. They have nothing left to lose. Neither do I said. I watched her drive away. My son was safe. My wife was in a hospital bed, protected by the fact that her family was now the most wanted fugitives in America. I got back in my truck and turned toward the mountains. The sun was setting again. The sky was red. I reached the base of the mountain road that led to Victor's cabin around midnight. I parked the truck and covered it with branches. I would walk the last 5 miles uphill. The air was thin and cold. Snow was starting to fall. I moved through the trees, silent as the snowfall. I was wearing white camouflage now, a snowsuit I kept in my survival kit. I was invisible. I reached the clearing where the cabin stood. It was dark. No lights. They were practicing light discipline. Smart. But they forgot one thing. Heat. I put on my thermal goggles. The cabin lit up like a Christmas tree in the infrared spectrum. I could see the heat bloom from the chimney. I could see 4 distinct heat signatures moving inside the main room. And one signature sitting still in a chair, Victor. 5 men left. Felix, Grant, Ian, Kyle, Victor. They were armed. They were scared. And they were waiting for me. I checked my gear, my knife, my hammer, and a handful of flashbang grenades I had borrowed from the warehouse cache before the cops arrived. I crept up to the generator shed behind the cabin. It was humming. I didn't cut the power this time. That was the old trick. They would expect that. Instead, I rigged the fuel line. I poured sugar, a simple packet of sugar I had in my MRE, into the gas tank. It wouldn't kill the engine instantly. It would gum it up. It would make it sputter, cough, and die slowly. It would make the lights flicker and dim, creating a strobe effect that induces panic. I moved to the front porch. I placed a Claymore mine, a dummy one I used for training, but it looked real enough to terrify, facing the front door. Then, I went to the window. I tapped on the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Inside, the heat signatures froze. Did you hear that? I heard Kyle whisper. It's just the wind, Victor said. But his voice shook. Tap, tap, tap. Louder this time. Go check it, Victor ordered Felix. Felix moved toward the window, his rifle raised. He peered out into the darkness. He couldn't see me. I was pressed against the wall, below the sill. I waited until his face was pressed against the glass. Then I stood up. I was wearing a skull mask, My old Delta deployment mask. Felix screamed and fired his rifle through the window. Crash. Glass shattered. I rolled away instantly, disappearing into the snow. He's here. Felix yelled. He's outside. Kill him. Victor roared. Everyone outside. Surround the cabin. The front door flew open. Grant and Ian ran out, guns blazing into the dark woods. They saw the Claymore mine on the porch. Mine, Grant screamed, diving off the porch into the snow. Ian followed him. They lay there, face down in the freezing snow, waiting for an explosion that never came. While they were pinned down by a fake mine, I circled back to the rear door. I kicked it open. I threw a flashbang inside. Bang. A blinding white light. A deafening concussive boom. I walked into the room. Victor was sitting in his chair, rubbing his eyes, blinded. Felix was on the floor, ears ringing. Kyle was cowering in the corner. Hello, boys, I said. I closed the door behind me and locked it. Now, I said, lifting the hammer. Who wants to be number 3? The flashbang smoke still hung thick, the room flickering dim in the dying power. Every beam of light quivered between life and darkness, exactly how I wanted it. Felix was coughing, disoriented. Kyle was trying to crawl behind a couch. Victor was still seated, one hand over his face, the other feeling for the pistol on his thigh. The hammer felt heavy and alive in my hand, vibrating like it already knew its purpose. Hunter, Victor's voice cracked through the fog. Listen to me. This won't bring her back. It's not about bringing her back, I said, stepping into the light. It's about making sure no one forgets what you did. Felix swung blindly at me with his pistol. I stepped sideways and smashed the weapon down with the hammerhead, driving it into the floorboards. He howled, clutching his wrist. I brought the hammer up again, not to kill, not yet, just to mark him. One strike to the shoulder joint, clean, measured. His scream shuddered through the cabin. Kyle jumped from behind the couch, knife trembling in both hands. I didn't move until he was almost on me. Then I pivoted, caught his forearm, twisted. The knife clattered to the floor. I held him by the collar, his terror soaking my glove. I begged Dominic to stop, Kyle blurted. I told them to stop. Then you should have helped her, I said, pressing the handle of the hammer against his throat. You held the camera. He froze, realization breaking through his panic. His lips parted, but no sound came out. I let him fall unconscious to the floor with one sharp hit to the temple. Victor had found his gun by then. He leveled it, hands shaking. His aim was good for a man half-blind and bleeding rage. After all these theatrics, he hissed, you still think you're righteous? You broke into my home. I cut him off. You broke into mine first. He fired. The shot cracked against the wall inches from my ear. I dove behind the overturned couch. Plaster rained from the ceiling. The generator outside began coughing. It was starting to choke on the sugar I'd poured in earlier. The lights flickered harder now, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. Felix was dragging himself toward Victor, moaning, Dad, we gotta get out. But Victor wasn't listening. He fired again. Then again. The pistol clicked dry. I rose from behind the couch, calm. Each step I took toward him echoed between the slowing thuds of the engine outside. He threw the gun at me. It bounced off my vest. You think you can erase me? He snarled. You think people like me ever disappear? I've run this town for 30 years. Men like me don't fall. We build the walls the law hides behind. You're right, I said softly. But walls fall faster when the fire starts inside. He swung at me with his empty hand. I caught his wrist midair and bent it backward. His knees hit the floor with a dull crack. 31 strikes, I said quietly. You remember that number? His throat bobbed. She betrayed me. She would have ruined, Count, I said. He stared up at me, confused. What? Count, Victor. I raised the hammer. You owe her every single one. The first hit landed on the floor beside his knee. The second, on the arm of the chair where he was holding the gun. Splinters exploded upward. The third struck the fireplace mantel. Each hit came closer, slower, measured, not killing blows, not yet. They were sounds for him to remember. counting the same way he'd made her count. He was sobbing now, not from the threat of death, but from the echo of what he'd done. Outside, the generator sputtered its final cough and died. The cabin plunged into darkness, the fire from the house miles below now the only glow threading through the windows. Felix groaned where he lay. Cal was still out cold. The silence returned, the same silence that had haunted me that first night in my home. "You think this ends with you?" Victor rasped, voice small now. "There are others, my partners. They'll come for you." "Let them," I said. "I'll be waiting." He reached for his pocket again, maybe for a hidden weapon, maybe a phone. I didn't wait to find out. I swung the hammer once, low, controlled, straight into his gun hand. The bones shattered like glass under steel. He screamed, falling sideways. The fight in him finally died. I turned off my night visor. The darkness became real again, not tactical darkness, but final. Overhead, I heard footsteps, Grant and Ian returning from outside. They burst through the front door, yelling for their father. "Victor!" Grant shouted. "Dad, where?" They froze when they saw me standing in the faint firelight. Their father writhing on the floor. Felix unconscious, Kyle unmoving. "Run," Victor whispered to them, blood bubbling on his lip. "Run." They didn't move. They were staring at the hammer in my hand, at the quiet man who looked more ghost than flesh. Ian stumbled backward, tugging Grant by the arm, but Grant stood rooted. "You burned it all," Grant said. "The money, the warehouse, everything." "No," I said. "You did." I threw something at his feet, Dominic's phone. It landed with a chirp as new messages flooded in. FBI, news alerts, arrest warrants attaching to the Victor family empire. His eyes widened. His entire world collapsed in a glowing screen. Ian lunged for the door. I let him go. He tripped into the snow and kept running, panting curses into the trees. Grant stayed, jaw clenched, trying to rebuild the man he thought he was inside that crumbling body. He raised his gun halfway, shaking. "Go ahead," I said. "Make the last mistake of your life." He didn't. He dropped the weapon. "You should have stayed a soldier," he said. This isn't justice." "You're right," I replied, stepping forward, close enough to see the reflection of the fire dancing in his eyes. "This isn't justice. It's balance." He didn't get the chance to answer before I hit him across the jaw with the hammer handle. He fell beside his father. I looked at Victor one last time. "That was 6, I said. "The rest," I gestured at the flames. "They burn with your name." I walked out as the fire from the generator shed crawled up the siding of the cabin. Snow fell harder now, blanketing the forest in silent white. Behind me, the empire of Victor Wolf finally cracked under its own weight. The only sound left was the wind and the faint whimper of fire eating wood. I walked through the trees without looking back. The storm carried the smoke into the night. And somewhere beyond the hills, my son slept safe, waiting for a father with blood on his hands to find peace someday. But peace had a price, and dawn hadn't yet come. Snow stung my face as I stepped into the clearing. The cabin behind me was fully swallowed in orange flame, a collapsing monument to Victor's empire. The heat pressed against my back, and somewhere inside that inferno, I could still hear them, groaning, screaming, breaking. The echoes of wolves dying in their den. But one escaped. Ian. I saw his footprints leading into the woods, erratic and wide apart. The trail of a man running blind through fear and cold. I followed slowly, my steps silent, each one sinking deep into the new snow. The trees whispered above me. Every crack of a branch sounded like judgment. 10 minutes later, the trail veered downhill toward an old logging road. I saw him through the trees, stumbling, holding his side, coughing into the cold. The gun in his hand was shaking badly, clicking empty. He'd been firing at ghosts. I didn't aim the rifle. I wanted him to see me. "Ian," I called out. My voice traveled like smoke through the night. He spun around, almost slipping. "Hunter, please, man, I didn't do half of it. It was Dad. It was them. You were there. You held the door shut. I couldn't stop them." I nodded once. Neither could she. He started crying, loud and broken, falling to his knees in the snow. "I'm sorry," he screamed. "I'm so sorry." "You're not sorry," I said, walking closer. "You're scared." He raised the empty gun like it meant anything. I kept walking. He clicked the trigger again and again. Dry fire, hollow metal. I could hear his heart even louder than the trigger clicks. When I reached him, he dropped the gun and covered his face. I didn't strike him. I leaned down instead. "She begged," I said quietly. "She begged you by name." His sobs turned to choking gasps. He dropped to the ground fully now, face pressed into the snow. I stood over him for a long moment, watching his breath fog the frost. Then I left him there, living in his nightmare. Death would have been mercy. By dawn, the fire had burned out behind me, leaving only blackened timber. Of the 7 sons, 2 were dead, 4 broken, and 1 missing. I thought it was over until the crunch of boots came from the ridge road. Police. At least a dozen of them. Their flashlights cut through the smoke. I backed into the trees, unseen. I saw the lead agent step forward, a woman in plain clothes. She pulled off her cap. It was Detective Miller. She looked different now, fear behind her professional calm. She was staring at the ruin of the cabin like she'd stepped into a war zone. 2 officers pulled a man out from the tree line a minute later. Victor. Burned, barely breathing, but alive. His legs were gone below the knees where a beam must have fallen on him. "Get a medic," Miller shouted. Victor tried to speak, his voice slurred through swelling lips. My grandson." That got Miller's attention. "Where is he?" Victor started laughing, a harsh rasp of air through broken teeth. He'll never belong to him." Then he coughed blood. I turned away before my hands could act again. He wasn't worth another bullet. I waited until the medevac came and the sirens faded down the mountain road. Then I walked the opposite way, north, toward the city. The streets were silent when I arrived back at the hospital. I hadn't washed the soot off yet. My clothes reeked of smoke and damp earth. The nurse at the ICU desk froze when I entered, her hand twitching toward the security button until she recognized me. "She's still the same," she whispered. "No change." Tessa's room was dim except for the monitor light pulsing beside the bed. The steady beat, her heart, was the only sound in the world that didn't haunt me. I sat beside her, my body heavy, my mind hollow. "They're gone," I told her softly. "All of them. Your father. He's alive, but not whole. The rest, they won't hurt anyone again." I looked at her face, pale but peaceful now, framed by soft light. Her chest rose and fell gently. "I found him, Tess," I whispered. "Our son, Leo. He's safe. And he's beautiful. You did it. You kept him alive through all that hell." Her eyelids didn't move, but her monitor line flickered, a slightly faster beat, then back. I leaned closer. "I promise you, I'm done fighting. I just need you to come back now. Please." The monitor kept its rhythm, steady as ever. Maybe she could hear me. Maybe she couldn't. I sat there until the horizon outside her window turned gold. A soft knock on the door pulled me back. I turned. It was Eleanor. Her coat was damp from the early rain. And in her arms, wrapped in a white blanket, was Leo. "I thought you might want him close," she said. I stood, my throat tightening. She placed him in my arms. Warm, fragile, real. He blinked up at me, his tiny face scrunching like he recognized something. Tessa's monitor beeped faster. I turned instantly. Her fingers twitched. Just once. Then again. Her hand opened slightly. "Doc," the nurse outside shouted. I held her hand tight with one of mine. Leo cradled against my chest with the other. Her eyes fluttered, trying to open. "Tessa, it's me." My voice cracked. "You're safe. We're both here." Her lips moved. No sound, just breath. I bent close. The word was barely a whisper, carried between heartbeats. "Leo." Her eyelids lifted, weak, but alive. For a long second, everything stopped. The past, the revenge, the blood. It was just family, broken but breathing. Outside the hospital window, light flooded through the rain clouds. The storm was over. For now. 3 days passed before I stepped outside that hospital room again. 3 days of silence, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of machines and the quiet breaths of the woman I'd almost lost. Tessa was alive. Barely, but alive, and Leo slept every few hours in a bassinet beside her bed. Every time his small fingers curled around mine, I reminded myself what the word revenge had cost us. But even peace can't hide from the law. When I finally walked into the hallway, 2 federal marshals were waiting. Black suits, stone faces, ID badges flashing under the fluorescent light. "Hunter Wolf," one asked. "That's me," I said calmly. "Come with us. You're wanted for questioning in connection with the Victor Wolf incident." I didn't argue. I knew this day would come. I looked back through the glass window of Tessa's room. Her eyes were open now, barely, watching me. I gave her a small nod, one soldier's promise to another. They led me through the snow-covered parking lot, where unmarked SUVs idled. The cold cut through my hospital hoodie but didn't reach the fire still simmering in my chest. Inside the interrogation room, they barely let me sit before the questions started. Agent Ramirez, the lead, leaned forward. "You want to tell me what you were doing in the mountains the night the Wolf family property exploded?" "Driving," I replied. He smirked. "You expect us to believe that?" "I don't expect you to believe anything." He leaned in. "We found 7 men, tortured, crippled, burned. 2 dead. We found recordings on a hidden drive in Victor's house. They show everything. The attack on your wife. The cover-ups. The trafficking. You're not a suspect anymore, Hunter. You're a witness." That threw me. Ramirez opened a file and slid a photo across the table. It was Victor, in a hospital bed, heavily bandaged, skin grafts climbing up his face. His eyes were open, glassy, aware enough to hate. "He refused to name anyone," Ramirez said. "Claimed he fell victim to an electrical accident. But with everything we found, his empire's over. He'll never see sunlight again." "What about his sons?" Ramirez shrugged. "The surviving 5 are facing charges that'll bury them for life." "That's justice, Wolf." "You got it." I stared at the photo for a long moment. "Justice," I echoed. "That what we're calling this?" He studied my face. "Look, I get it. What they did to your wife. No jury on this planet would convict you if you had done something. But you didn't. They burned themselves. You were just lucky." Lucky. The words sounded wrong in his mouth, obscene almost. I stood up. "Are we done?" He hesitated, then nodded. "You can go. But if you ever remember something useful about Victor's offshore accounts, call me." I walked out of the precinct into the weak morning sun. Snow was melting on the asphalt. The city was waking up. Normal people heading to jobs, holding coffee cups, laughing into phones. Life didn't stop just because mine had been burned beyond recognition. When I reached the hospital, Tessa was sitting upright. Pale, fragile, but alive in every way that mattered. She turned her head when I entered, eyes wet but strong. "I heard," she said softly. "They caught them." I nodded. "Then it's over." "Not yet," I said, pulling something from my jacket pocket, a small velvet box. Her eyes widened slightly. "Hunter, what is that?" I opened it. Her old wedding ring lay inside, polished, cleaned, unbroken despite everything. "They didn't take this from us," I said. "They only delayed it." Her hand trembled as I slipped the ring back onto her finger. Tessa cried silently, leaning back against the pillows. I sat beside her, holding her hand like I used to, our fingers interlocked. The monitor beeped steadily. Leo stirred in the bassinet and let out a small coo that cut through the heaviness in the air. For the first time in months, I smiled. But I couldn't ignore the shadow under her words. "What'll happen to us now?" she whispered. I looked out the window. Police cruisers, reporters, chaos. A world forever circling, waiting for fresh blood. "We rebuild," I said. "And this time, no one gets in." For a moment, the silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was healing. Then there was a knock on the door. Detective Miller stepped in, wearing a sling and a weary expression. He looked older than when I'd first met him. You got a visitor, he said. Straight from D.C. Behind him walked a woman in a dark business suit, Federal seal on her lapel. She introduced herself as Special Agent Wren. Mr. Wolf, she said, we're activating you under Title 14, Special Recon Status. The public doesn't know who shut down the Wolf Network, but you did us a service. The Bureau could use someone with your skills. I laughed under my breath. You want me to work for you? You need a clean slate. We can give you that, she said. New identity. Relocation. Permanence, if you want it. Tessa tensed behind me. He's done fighting, she said sharply. Wren nodded. We'll call that your decision, then. But if you ever change your mind, she slid a card on the hospital tray. You've already proven you can deliver justice without leaving fingerprints. When she left, the only sound was Leo's quiet breathing. Tessa looked at me, eyes questioning. Are you thinking about it? No, I said. But it's nice to know hell still thinks I'm qualified. She laughed softly. Then, Hunter, promise me this. No more blood. No more war. I nodded. I promise. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the last smell of smoke from the mountains. I looked at Leo, then at her hand resting in mine, the ring glinting faintly beneath the sunlight. Maybe peace was fragile. Maybe it wouldn't last. But for now, it was ours. The snow had melted into quiet puddles by the time we left the hospital. The world looked different now, smaller, slower, as if it had finally taken a breath after holding it for too long. Tessa sat in the wheelchair cradling Leo, sunlight spilling over her face like forgiveness itself. She wasn't healed yet, not completely, but she was free. We drove north along the coast, away from everything that once defined us. The streets where her father's name still echoed, the house that would forever remember blood. A rented cabin waited by the ocean. Simple, empty, silent. For the first time, silence didn't sound like loss. It sounded like peace. I built a small fire while Tessa slept inside with the baby. The waves rolled in steady, each one whispering against the sand like an old friend saying, breathe. The flames danced low, orange and gold, and I thought about everything that had brought us here. The pain, the rage, the long nights where I had become something less than human just to protect what little remained of it. And now, sitting by the fire, I realized vengeance doesn't fill you. It empties you. When the door behind me creaked, I turned. Tessa was standing there wrapped in a blanket, Leo's tiny head resting on her shoulder. For a moment, the night around her blurred, salt air, orange light, all swallowed by her quiet presence. Do you ever think it could have been different? She asked softly. Every day, I said. We stood there while the wind carried sea spray between us and the horizon. Somewhere behind the sound of crashing water, I could hear Leo's breathing, calm, even safe. He'll grow up knowing the truth someday, she said. I nodded. And when he does, I'll tell him that monsters are real, but they bleed like everyone else. She pressed her forehead against mine. And you'll tell him his mother fought twice, once to live and once to forgive. Yeah, I whispered, my voice rough. He'll know that forgiving saved us more than revenge ever could. We stood there until dawn, the fire turning to embers, the sky washing from black to pale silver. I watched the first rays of light touch Leo's face. He moved a little, then smiled in his sleep. It hit me harder than any bullet, any battlefield. That small, peaceful smile, it was everything we'd fought for. The siren songs of revenge were silent now. The war was over. I lifted my eyes to the ocean and felt the weight lift from my chest. Not gone, but carried by the waves. Somewhere out there, Victor Wolf's empire had become dust. And somewhere in here, the hunter I used to be had finally put down his hammer. Sometimes winning isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about choosing not to become them. I turned to Tessa and said, let's go inside. He'll wake up soon. She smiled. Home. Home, I said. And just like that, we walked back together through the early light, scars and all, stronger than the world that tried to break us. Before this story ends, there's one thing I want to leave you with. What would you have done if it was your family? Would you forgive, or would you fight until there was nothing left of you? Tell me down below in the comments.